could you each start off with what was the first experience which kind of tailored your understanding of the importance of security within your organization, right? Like, was it a cultural thing? Was it like, a bad experience of like, getting hacked that kind of gravitated you towards like, hey, we need to be thinking harder about securing the products and services that each of your organizations prepare in a world where more and more outcomes are technology enabled, right? We are moving where there are more, where there's more software in cars, right? Currently in some cars than there ever was like 10 years ago, right? And I think this momentum is just going to take us down a road where like there's a level of automation experience that the customer desires, which is enabled by technological innovations within that diaphragm, right? Similarly, within healthcare, like I think Matthew, we've talked about this previously about like, what experiences have created your understanding of the importance of product security, and how have you manifested it within your organization? So Zah, we can actually start with you.
Can you hear me? Yeah, you can hear me. So I'm Gonzalvo, Flagstar Bank. I'm happy to be here. So for me, and my background is in risk management. That's where IT and risk management has been where I've spent most of my career, and I've been in this role for 10 months. Coming into this role from a product consumer-facing perspective, I really realized practical experience of where the risk lies for a consumer. Coming from a financial institution, our biggest asset is customer information. And so came in the midst of an acquisition where we were acquiring around 52 new branches from Wells Fargo. We saw an increment on cyber fraud through our online banking platforms. And at that moment, started trying to do some gap analysis on what was the issue, why that was coming, and realized that security was not completely at the table where decisions were making as it relates to our online banking platform. And so that has to be top of mind. And so that made us change how do we even get included in the product decisions. And I see it as a two-pronged approach. One, you need to be part of the new product committee. Every organization has some level of governance about new products. So for us, we have a new product committee where now I sit at the table and I'm part of the discussion, and I have people in my team. I have security architects that are working with the product development team to make sure that technical requirements are embedded into the product. So that is critical for us, and something that was, we learned by going through some experiences on what changes we need to make in our framework to make sure that security is top of mind.
Thanks. Matthew, I will stop you when you want to.
Okay. Well, for me, it was living through multiple instances of the researcher community pointing out flaws in our products. Mm-hmm. And so the organization realized if we're going to continue to make products, we've got to do it securely. We've got to get in front of the wave. We've got to reduce the instances that we're seeing. And if we don't, our customers are going to call us out on it. So for us, it was we know we have to. It's the right thing to do for the customers. And if we don't, they're gonna notice. We have to stay in front of that. We have to be the organization that is making secure products that exceed our customers' expectations.
That's fair.
I'm Dennis Hodges. Basically, been CIO with Inteva products for 12 years. We spun off from Delphi. And when we did, there was a big gap between IT and engineering in particular. And as we acquired another company with a big presence in Germany, I think they even had more of a split. So there was a request for an audit from one of the OEMs, German OEMs, in one of our facilities in Germany, a tech center. And they walked to the door and said, if you have ISO 27001 certification, we'll turn around and leave. And the engineers said, we don't know what you're talking about, so they started the audit. So eventually it got elevated high enough that they raised their hand and said, we need help. So that's how we got involved from IT being involved in. So you said security's not always invited to the table. IT wasn't even being invited to the table. So we've tried to build both practices into the kind of the fabric of the company over the last period of time. I think we've been fairly successful with it. To us, it's the OEMs. We do get some body and white data, which in their mind is keep it secret, keep it safe. Gandalf couldn't have said it better than the OEMs. The last thing you can do is have their data get out in front of a competitor, because we're seeing it, 7 years before it goes into production.
Sure. So Scott Bennett, I've been a divisional CIO, North American CIO, global CIO, and then I've recently taken on VP apps. And I'm an app guy. I didn't come from the infrastructure space. But I think the place that I first got exposure to, really taking security seriously and getting engaged with it was more at a board or director level. Really looking at us as an organization, my past companies of, hey, what is your security posture? How does that put us at risk? How does it put not only the board members, but your customers, and looking at your whole organization, making sure you look at it really across the entire organization than in one niche area. And I think as we've done that, there's a couple aspects of security that I would bring to the group to think about. It's not only your data and what you think about from an IT perspective, it's also how you blend that back into things like facilities management and the rest of the organization. And that's something that, whether you're CISO practitioners, you're in the infrastructure or the app side, you kind of have to take a step back and say, I might be building into the product, I might be building into niche solutions that I have, I might be just building into making sure we're secure across the board. And I bring that flavor too, because I did disaster recovery for 9/11. I drove out there the next day. So I probably always bring, hey, how are we thinking about that in terms of physical security as well? So just a thought.
Yeah, no, I think that's fascinating. But so as you've tried to achieve in your use cases outcomes, cybersecurity outcomes, security outcomes, right? Have you interacted with a range of companies, and I'm going to call them startups, but they can be at a different stage, right? Some could be like pre-IPO, some could be like, hey, 2 people are in a garage, right? Have you used any of them to solve a particular problem? Do you guys have any examples of like where you might have chosen to work specifically with a startup to achieve an outcome because of maybe the time window you were looking at or the focus they have on the solution that you needed actually in-house? I mean, and we can go back from you, Scott. Like, do you have an example where you might have actually worked with one where like, you had a good experience, bad experience, don't need to name them, but
yeah,
just talk about what it was.
One of my past experiences is we sold off a division, right? So they sold $1.5 billion division off, and we sold it to a holding company where that holding company did not have an IT group. So one of the things that we had to do is we had to set up all the IT functions, including the security function, and think about how we wanted to segment that off. And we really didn't have a large security organization already. Now you're splitting and you need to set that up, and you really want to set that up kind of in a white piece of paper and how it should be. So, the best experience that we had in that instance was going with a professional services group that helped design that from the ground up. It was something that I didn't try to force feed into an organization. I had really a white sheet of paper to go ahead and build that into the organization, which was almost taking a mature business unit and trying to create them almost as a entrepreneurial startup type of culture that you were building that program from ground up. But for us, the best experience was using a third-party firm. I'll give them a plug. CBI did a great job. That's out of Detroit. And they helped us think about the strategy and put in kind of the right pillars, along with some tool sets that we got more mature over time.
That's cool. Dennis, does any example come to your mind in terms of what you've seen?
It's interesting, the experience he just talked about. We've been through that. We spun off part of the company in May. The only difference was the company that we were spinning it off to thought they knew what they were doing, so they didn't want to spend any money. So it was being all done on the back of an envelope. That was our white sheet of paper. It was a dirty envelope or dirty napkin from a restaurant, it seemed like. But we have, in ways that serendipity is, we've been fortunate to meet with venture capital groups. Our original network provider that we still use was owned by or funded by a VC group out of the Valley, and I've maintained a good relationship with them. And rather than going and trying to find the two guys in the garage, because most of the time that's about all we can afford, because we are a tier one, not an OEM, so we try to do things less expensively. So we've been able to find smaller companies that were actually like, Series A or wherever along the way, so that we weren't taking the risk because we knew the people that were funding them and had good relationship with them. So it wasn't necessarily someone was trying to sell us something as much as they were trying to say, we'd like to have your logo with this.
That's fascinating. I'm guessing these were good experiences, and so you're happy about it.
I still have all my fingers, and I've been there for 12 years. Yeah.
Okay, do you want a bad experience?
I don't want to.
Okay, good. All right, this is the good experience table, bad experience
These are
table.
bad here.
All right. So coming from a product engineering perspective, right? We sell stuff. We need to have best of breed in technology. We need to have extra layers. We really focus a lot on defense in depth of what it works in runtime. How do we build it properly? So we're always looking for new tech, new startups that can help us in that space. So we've looked at a lot of different startups, from whenever you go to like the village in like RSA or Insert Security Conference here, where they've got the startups. We'll pick a few of those and talk to them. And we tend to bump into a couple problems there. And that one, often they're targeting the enterprise. That's great that you want to target the enterprise as a startup, but I'm talking about embedding tech in my product.
Yeah.
I don't need it to be able to integrate with my Active Directory. I need it to be able to integrate with my customers' Active Directory, right? Or two, I've seen them really be struggling to understand the limitations of their own stuff. When I can point out flaws in your product that you haven't thought of yet, that's not giving me that warm fuzzy feeling about your tech chops and making this cool new thing that you think you got.
How about you?
From my perspective, we've had good or bad. I mean, you mentioned Duo. Duo is a startup that we've been using now, I believe, for 3 years at least, and we have a good relationship with them, and it has really worked for us. We hope to continue the relationship with them. Even though, as you guys know, or probably don't know, that they were acquired by a larger company, by Cisco, right? So there are some nuances that come with that. And so from a bad experience perspective, something that I had to deal with when I came into this role, we had been working with a startup and trying to implement WAF, a web application firewall for the company for a specific product that is consumer facing. What we didn't do during due diligence, and that's something that I really now have to consider as we evaluate startups, is you need to really investigate what is the support model. This was a one-person shop. And so we didn't check into, does it have DR? Is it scalable to deploy to more than one solution? What is the financial stability of the startup? Who is funding this in the back end? If something happened to the guy and gets thrown by a bus, hopefully no, he wins the lottery. Let's think positive. That's a better way of saying it. What happens then? Or even if it gets acquired by a bigger company, then what are your contractual agreements that you have, and where is going to be in terms of the support model? So these are things that you absolutely have to consider when you're evaluating. We didn't do that. We had that bad experience, but that hasn't changed our mind on our willingness to work with startups. I think there are pros that we'll continue talking about.
I mean, I think that's fascinating. I think, like, just to recap, right? I think, like, the importance of security stems from some outcomes you're looking for in an organization, right? You want to ship secure products, right? You don't want patching happening. Like, patching is the best way of saying, like, hey, I didn't think about solving for certain security issues, right? Every time Apple sends it out, I'm like, oh, even Apple is not perfect, right? But at the same time, right, I think startups play a role, and I think startups need a cohesive working relationship with an IT organization when they're trying to collaborate with you, right? Like you said, like, hey, you want them to come with an Active Directory integration for your customers and not your own, right? How does that work within your organizations? How closely does the security team and the engineering team coordinate their work, right? And what does that relationship look like? And how does it get exposed when working with a third-party organization to achieve like a common goal, right? So I think like, do you have like processes, checklists? Like you started talking about like, hey, we need to be knowing a certain set of things about a startup before we choose to work with them, right? But on the flip side of it, as a practitioner, how are you, as leaders, like how are you organizing your organizations to actually better deliver internally, right? Are you running, common tools where like the lingo is common between the product security team and the engineering team, right? Are you following an SDLC process as part of your development lifecycle, like even at Lear, right? Like, as in like, what is the level of integration and how does that work evolve when it relates with working with someone on the outside, right? With the startup trying to actually help you achieve some goal that you're trying to actually get to. So Zach, maybe we can actually go from your side, like as in like, can you talk about like what that process looks like internally for you?
Yeah, so internally we have security architects that are working directly with the application development team, and they're part of the tollgate processes, DLC, and even in some of our business units, we run agile environments. And we have developed a framework for security to get integrated into that. Our security standards are converted into technical requirements, and those are required before any go-live implementation. When we are evaluating new products or startups, especially on the product side, the IT directors and from the application development team and product development team, they know that part of the process is to engage us. We have a proof of concept methodology to make sure that we're integrated and we are part of the evaluation from a security perspective.
That's helpful, Matt.
So for us, we focus on secure development behaviors.
Okay.
And then we check to make sure, have they done the thing that we want them to do at the right time? And then what were the outcomes?
This is the engineering.
Yeah, with the engineering. And we work very closely. My peers and I and my team of direct reports all work with various product orgs that are assigned to us to make sure that they're doing similar to your security architecture role. And then from there, we've got that relationship. We know what we expect out of the engineering teams. Engineering teams understand what they can get from us and what we expect of them. We look for vendors that may have a piece of technology that fits in that particular behavior. It might make, just toss one out, static code analysis or something like that. So we're gonna look at it. If there's a new vendor, we're more than happy to talk to them. But we need to understand the key thing from them is how does their, whatever it is, help us make more secure product? And I've seen vendors trip up on that because back to my earlier comment about they're thinking about the enterprise, they're not realizing I'm trying to ship product and they're not helping me make a more secure product. They're helping me make a more secure enterprise. That's great. I want a secure enterprise, right? I focus on product. And so we try to embed security throughout that cycle, including in the way we approach and choose vendors.
I got you. And so I think as you're saying this, like, are there deal breakers, like when you engage with the startup today where this is a red flag, like I will not pursue, other than like their sales motion, it sounds like they're trying to pursue securing the organization. They don't understand your responsibility being the head of product security at GE Healthcare instead of like, you're not managing the IT resources in general, right? Are there red flags that you observe or look out for when engaging with security startups?
We've had challenges of the startup is too new or too small, as I think Zah was mentioning. And that can be a risk that our sourcing team may flag because they worry about what happens if the guy calls it rich or whatever. So we have that same challenge. Also, we look at them and one of the problems I've seen is that product securities, or security products rather, things that might help us make more secure products on our side are often themselves really insecure. So we actually look at, and we have our vendor of security architects, right, product security leaders, my peers and I, will look at a potential vendor tech that might fit one of those niches of what we expect the engineering teams to accomplish. And if we can poke really big holes in it, it's not going in a product or not getting used on a product. So they have to make sure that their own stuff, turn that security eye within.
Dennis, how's that been for you? Like, you have like an RFP process that you run within the organization when you're looking at like bringing in external help to achieve cybersecurity outcomes?
Well, we really do have two areas of security, cybersecurity. One is IT, the traditional,
Right.
and we follow the process. We tend to not bring in really small, just getting started companies in that space.
Mm-hmm.
We want at least somebody that's been vetted enough that somebody else is willing to invest in them. On the other side, though, especially with automotive technology, and Tesla, I guess, is pushing the envelope there as much as anybody. They'll download software overnight.
Mm-hmm.
So when Florida had the hurricanes, they actually downloaded software so the batteries had full power, or they could use full power rather than being governed.
Mm-hmm.
If you buy a certain model, you only got 300 miles. Well, they allowed it to drain the battery. So things like that happen. But the worst thing you can think of is rebooting a car at 60 miles an hour.
Oh yeah.
So that's kind of where we're going. Our motors group, we make motors for window regulators, the things that make windows go up and down. We do it in a pinch because you don't want a finger or a child's neck or anything else be between that window and the frame. And those guys don't. I say guys, group of people don't think about that anyone would try to hack into that.
Yeah.
And that is scary. And that's what my main job, in a lot of ways, is trying to bring technology, not just in IT, but bring it to the organization. Whether it's software development because we don't reload software in a motor ever. So it has to be right when it's sold.
Oh, that's fascinating. And how's that experience been for you? I mean, since you joined Lear, Scott, have you noticed certain things that they do differently, which you've changed? Or?
So I'll talk a little bit about enterprise IT rather than the product side on that. The way that we're structured is we have dev and deploy groups, and then we actually have a production support. So we do, when I look at whether it's the application side, the infrastructure, the security, those practices, we go ahead and have really our architecture, our project side, our deploy, and then we turn it over to team members that are kind of run by a different group that runs production support. And I think that actually has helped us mature a lot, whether it's in security or in the application side of, hey, I've got to think about the standards that I want to deploy across and really focus on your standards. Then focus on, I'm very good at projects and I'm not trying to carry the baggage of keeping the lights on. And then when I do a project, I have an end so that I can transition that over. And that applies to security, let alone to the app area that I run. Now, I'd say the second piece since I've started, and I've been there since March, it's taking that background that I have as a CIO and taking a step back across those groups and saying, we will deploy consistently for the good of IT and for rather than just a pillar. In the security example, in the app side, we're building security all the way from, hey, we're thinking about our standard, we're deploying the product, to we're doing, before the gate review, we're actually scanning the product, right? And then after I put it into production, continuing to scan, say, and from a code release standpoint, right? So that I'm building in security into that process, where you can imagine a 20, X billion dollar organization has a lot of legacy stuff. Now you're scanning it through, not only on the care and feeding the legacy, but as you change that process. So you're finding out things along the way. And so for us, it's kind of, I would say the two pieces are, hey, looking at our structure so that we're good at thinking about the standards, doing projects, and having the post support, but also trying to build some of those characteristics into the process.
And so, have you encountered the fact that security usually always brings some amount of friction within the organization, right? Because now you're asking people to do extra stuff, right? What are some of the considerations when you are building a security organization, right? As in, did you look for companies which can ease the productivity of your security practitioners within the organization? Or you're trying to say hey, I need to train these people, right, to be more deep, right? What areas are you stressing on when it comes to achieving security outcomes? And you're all $1 billion franchises here, right? So how do you think you are growing the responsibility across like the IT organization to improve the security standard within the company, right? From a people's perspective, like what are you doing differently? What are you thinking about? And I talk about, and part of what I want to get from it is, in the long run, do you expect to actually outsource a lot of this work, right, to a startup which actually comes in and says like, you know what, I can help you solve this problem? Or are you invested enough in the security organization where you're saying like, this is my core responsibility, my team's responsibility, we're going to double down, we're going to grow a product security organization or security organization in lockstep with how we are scaling our applications, right? Does that make sense?
It does. So I'll go ahead and there's a lot in that area, right?
Sorry.
Yeah. So I'll talk about two pieces. I'll talk about the friction, right? So we probably all see the friction of, hey, how do we deal with that inside an organization? I think that's one piece, and I'll kind of carve that out first. When I think the political climate, I think the awareness kind of across the board is making it less of an initial friction. So I think that there's a broader awareness of, hey, security is important, and that we need to focus on security, whether it's at the board level, at the executive level, or when you go through the operations to kind of run that. So I think we have that theme working for us. The place that I still think we've got a long way to go in the industry is, well, then when we go to roll it out, we're still going to get some pushback, right? And so what do you do with that pushback? And my recommendation is, hey, you just have to roll through that, right? You know, so it's going to be something that's going to be part of your campaign all the way through, and you just have to stick through it and be consistent. I think if you take a 3 or 4 month sabbatical, you're starting that process over. So I would say keep that wheel lubed and just keep pushing forward and continue your campaigns kind of going forward. Now, you asked, hey, where does the startup piece or the support go? I think most areas you're going to look for help when you're architecting, and you're going to look for help when you've been able to commoditize and operationalize that. So to me, hey, a lot of times you need help in the beginning to get it started. You might need staff aug and other areas just to continue to push. But then that big piece afterward is, hey, someone can do it cheaper, and I'm not going to get more bodies to do it. Right? We're not. I may have to shift my organization, and we have been in making security, a larger organization inside probably most IT groups. But you're not going to get more heads necessarily, especially in kind of current market conditions. So you'll have to do some shifting, and then you'll have to look for what are the best professional services, maybe at the right cost, that can do that cheaper than you can do it internally and keep projects going. So those are the pieces I guess I'd cover.
Yeah, I would. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I mean, I'm curious. Another auto perspective.
I would agree basically with everything you said there. It's the real challenge is again getting back to the product we push out the door, but internally the ability to structure things so that we can say you do want some people to help you as you get started down the design. But to me, that's where we try to own it, because we try to move as much as we can to the cloud. So your CASB, that type of area of understanding how those interface with each other, because we're trying to drive costs out. So we're not just moving a data center to someone hosting it for us. We're trying to move to multi-tenant SaaS, because that's the only way you really save money. You can save tremendous amounts of money, but you open all kinds of doors from a security perspective. So you have to be able to trust your vendors, which is, gets back to they're not the ones with probably 2 people in a garage at that point. But, building on top of that, then, again, my biggest challenge is working with that controls engineer that has 17 different operating systems on their PC. They have to have administrative rights. And all they talk to are injection molding machines, lasers, and robots. I mean, other than that, they're just working right next to someone. Danger, the ability for someone, they allow third parties into their computer to take over that controller, PLC or whatever, and just your head explodes when you think about them doing that. So that's it's a constant battle and keeps you young.
Matt, what's your perspective from a product security organization?
Gosh, there's a bunch of things in there. For starters, the friction, yeah, we see it all the time. And I think part of it depends on the maturity level, the security maturity level of the particular organization. And also just because fundamentally, especially in the product security world, sometimes our job is to tell them their baby is ugly. And so we have to find the creative way to tell them that it's not that their baby's ugly, it's that pediatric rhinoplasty is all the rage right now. So we have to figure out the right way to put it in terms that they understand. But fundamentally, that's an educational problem, right? So a lot of what we focus on, and this is to kind of get to your point about where do I think vendors can fit in, is teaching them not just about the usual IT security compliance stuff, but making sure they understand how to develop code or how to build a product securely on their own, because that's going to make my team scale out better.
Yeah.
It's going to make my peers scale out better, and it's going to make the overall product security story better. And that's an area where we wouldn't, even if we could do it in-house, we got plenty of other security challenges to solve. That's an area where we would absolutely look at a vendor that might have a new and creative way to integrate into the IDE to do that secure development teaching at the same time, or maybe already has an existing curriculum that we could just acquire outright with some sort of licensing contract.
Fascinating. What about you?
I mean, for us, in terms of friction, something to consider too is the customer friction that creates from a product perspective, having additional security, additional authentication, additional steps to get to your banking account or to even pay your loan, right? So for us, where we see startups coming in or vendors coming in, is to, instead of us trying to figure out that how to reduce that friction and yet make it more secure, is how do we bring in vendors that could potentially do biometrics or different type of things that make it easier from a customer experience perspective and reduce that friction, but at the same time make it more secure. So that's something that we are working on right now, from internally, from the people aspect and the organizational aspect, automating, for example, our security operations team and the tasks that they do. So we've done that. We use GuidePoint. Is our virtual SOC that we do as a first level responder, and a lot of they use in their side of the house, they use things like the Misto, etc., that are startups that are automating a lot of those tasks. So from my perspective, it's retrain my team to then manage that relationship or move to other more critical things that we can work on. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily reduction in force, but it is how do we better use the skills of the team for, instead of doing the mundane type of activities that are still important and critical, is how I move them to do more strategic things.
I think what you just said is the term we haven't used yet, which surprises me. 45 minutes into anything in IT technology these days is artificial intelligence.
Yes.
And robotics,
Machine
process
learning,
automation,
absolutely.
machine learning, because that's the mundane work that can be done by the system. And then the individual is there to understand, the correlation between those. I'm not asking for AI to go to that level yet, but make it where the security analyst didn't spend 10 hours a day looking through logs. They get, everything bubbles up and they get the tea rather than the water and the sticks.
I think it's fascinating, right? Because in your own words, I think what you're answering one of the questions of saying, yes, I want to invest in my security organization, but I also want, from a people investment perspective, I also want a tool investment, right? Like, give me better tools so that I can make my team and my resources count for more. And in certain cases where I think it's a job which requires a particular skill set, and maybe you do not want to overinvest in it, you can actually figure out like a relationship where someone can actually do that for you. In your case, GuidePoint being your virtual SOC, right? I think this is fascinating. I think one last question before we open it up for like Q&A. I think as you think about the needs of an early stage company, right? The founders, right? What's like that one key advice you would give them, right? And I'm just asking one because I want to keep it short, but like, what's that one piece of advice that you would give to a cybersecurity founding team today who might be starting off in Detroit, right? Let's just say Detroit because I'm enjoying my time here. But what would be that one piece of advice that you would say, like, hey, make sure you do this, right? What would that be?
To me, is figure out, and we talked earlier about this, do you want to solve a problem on a horizontal level, meaning for any type of industry, or do you want to solve a problem within a particular industry? And if that's the case, learn what problem you're here to solve, because from a CISO perspective, we have vendor fatigue. That's the reality. We get, and I was telling you, I get at least 35 calls in a day. I get at least 10 boxes with packages from vendors in a week. And so it gets to the point that I don't want to listen to it or hear about it anymore. But if you come to me with a particular problem that you know that my industry is facing today, either from a regulatory aspect or from a risk perspective, I more than likely will be looking to you for help.
That's awesome. How about you, Matt?
I know there's the trend today is, well, we'll work very closely with customers and be very reactive and give them exactly what they ask for. That doesn't scale well. So similar to what Zah was referring to, I want them to pre-anticipate, if you will, what some of my needs are based on understanding what it is that we do, so that the features that we want are there before we ask for them, not after.
How about you, Dan?
I told Norwest Venture Partners, which VC group out of the Bay Area, you need to understand manufacturing. I mean, consumer space is, a thin veneer of security is okay, but when you get past that, and manufacturing, as an example from Detroit, is a huge market. We pay more for the same thing because it has to be ruggedized. So that would be mine.
So focus on the vertical that you're selling into. How about you?
I guess the recommendation that I would have is that you know what ecosystem you're going to use, right? It's not always about the tool set. You need to understand, and it goes back to the scalability of, you need to know what partners can go ahead and implement, right? So I'm looking typically that, hey, you're not going to be the tool set and the implementer, that you've got an implementation services group that can scale and understand how to bring that to the market. So if it's a startup, that's just getting started, you're going to want to have a partner that can go ahead and deploy and do that side and bring a lot of industry experts. So for me, I think that would be the words, in addition to what everyone said, of know your ecosystem, what ecosystem you can expand to.
Perfect. So fascinating. Any questions from the audience that we can take?
How much does a startup anticipate an exit strategy going like duo being acquired versus IPOing, staying independent, factoring into purchasing?
It's a very good question.
I'll answer that. So from my perspective, it varies on where we're going. So if we're talking, traditional software side, hey, I'm going to stay out of that, especially ERPs and other areas, if I think they're going to have it, because that's something I'm committed to for a very long time. In the security world, this is constantly changing. So I have far more tolerance for what the exit strategy is, because there's going to be a huge consolidation in the industry. So I'm far less sensitive of what that's going to be, because it's changing all the time.
So that depends on industry, I think. It's coming from a financial organization that is heavily regulated. For me, if I go to a regulator and say, I'm going to use for this particular cybersecurity risk that is very critical from a regulator perspective, because it's all about protecting customer information, and they haven't heard the system, they haven't heard who you're talking about, no other bank has been using that, I'm going to have issues. So I have to be very careful about the exit strategy, having backup plan, make sure that they have good partners that I can back up and say reference of who else has been using the product. So my coming into a startup, it may not be at the very, very early stages. I can be in watch mode. I may come in a little bit later. So I think it also depends on the type of industry that you're in.
Dennis, do you have anything to add to this?
Well, the more risk you're willing to take, the cheaper you can get it.
That is true too.
It's kind of where we live. So that intersection point And to me, it really does get back to not only knowing the team that's producing the product, but the people that are funding them.
Yeah.
And that, to me, has really worked out well. It's really helped a lot from that perspective.
I say thank you so much for your time. This was awesome. I think safe to say for the responsibilities that you have today, right, within your organizations, you have an open mind to actually say, I'm open to speaking to startups. But would it be fair to say you would be open to advising startups if they came by and said like, hey, you might not need this product, but here's what I'm building, right? Does it sound like something that could be interesting to you down the road in your industry, or like, can you help me think out loud about what we are building? Would it be safe to say like you would be open to advise startups as well? Each of you, or all of you?
Always happy to have a conversation.
And so who in the audience is actually looking for advice, right? As you're building your organization, feel free to approach them and get your questions answered. All right. Thank you so much.